There's a way to kill a man without spilling a drop of blood. It's a cold morning in Barcelona, March 2nd, 1974. Inside a sterile room in the Modelo prison, a 25-year-old man, Salvador Puig Antich, is strapped to a heavy wooden chair. He's an anarchist, a militant who fought against Franco's authoritarian regime, and he has been condemned to die. But the instrument of his death isn't a hangman's noose, a firing squad, or the blade of a guillotine. Instead, he faces a machine built for a different kind of killing. A death that's quiet, methodical, and agonizingly slow. An iron collar is placed around his neck. Unlike a bullet, this device isn't designed for a quick release. It's built to crush, to suffocate, and to extinguish a life over several conscious minutes. This is the Spanish Garrote, one of history's most feared instruments of state-sanctioned killing. And this is its final, brutal act. The device that ended Salvador Puig Antich's life wasn't some relic of the distant medieval past. It was the official execution method in Spain, used until just a year before the dictator Franco's death. In essence, the Garrote, or Garrote Vil, is a machine designed for strangulation. It started as a simple cord or wire, but in the hands of the Spanish state, it evolved into something far more clinical and terrifying. A heavy wooden chair, a post, a hinged iron collar, and a large screw. For centuries, this assembly was used to execute thousands of people, from common criminals to political dissidents. It held a strange place in the hierarchy of death, not as dishonorable as the public gallows, but a world away from the so-called noble death of beheading by sword. So, how did such a simple mechanism become one of the most brutal methods of execution ever conceived? To understand the Garrote is to look into a history of power, justice, and a nation's long and complicated relationship with cruelty. To witness a Garrote execution was to watch a life extinguished by the simple physics of pressure. The process was chillingly straightforward. The condemned person was seated, their back pressed firmly against a thick wooden post. Their arms, legs, and torso were tightly strapped to the chair, making any struggle useless. The executioner would then fit the key component, a heavy hinged iron collar, around the prisoner's neck before securing it to the post. Behind the post was a large T-shaped handle connected to a thick screw. When the executioner turned the handle, the screw advanced, tightening the metal band. From here, death could follow two horrifying paths. The most common was strangulation. As the iron collar tightened, it would compress the windpipe, making it impossible to breathe. At the same time, it constricted the carotid arteries, cutting off blood and oxygen to the brain. The victim would remain conscious for part of this, unable to scream or breathe as the pressure mounted. Death by asphyxiation could take several excruciating minutes. Sometime in the 19th century, an attempt was made to make the device more humane, or at least faster. This new version, sometimes called the Catalan Garrote, added a sharp metal spike aligned with the back of the neck. In theory, as the collar tightened, this spike would sever the spinal cord, causing immediate unconsciousness and a quicker death. However, the reality was often far from instant. The spike's effectiveness depended entirely on the executioner's skill. If it missed its mark, it would simply bore into the victim's neck, adding unimaginable pain to the slow agony of strangulation. Eyewitness accounts describe the silent, convulsive heaving of the victim's chest and the desperate struggle for air. This quiet and drawn-out process is what earned the Garrote its dreadful reputation. The death of Salvador Puig Antich, for instance, was reportedly agonizingly slow, with some accounts claiming it took nearly 20 minutes to complete. The Garrote's legacy stretches back long before its mechanical perfection. Strangulation has been a form of execution for millennia, with records of its use in ancient Rome. In medieval Spain, the device was little more than a rope looped around a victim's neck and a post. A stick, or garrote, would be twisted in the loop to strangle the person, and that's likely where the name comes from. For centuries, it was just one of many brutal methods. But in 1820, King Ferdinand VII declared the garrote the sole method of civilian execution in Spain, replacing options like hanging. This wasn't about mercy. It was about projecting an image of modern, state-controlled justice. Throughout the 19th century, its use was common for murderers and bandits, with public executions serving as grim spectacles. But the garrote's role turned even darker in the 20th century. During the Spanish Civil War, both nationalist and Republican forces used it to execute political enemies. When General Francisco Franco came to power, the garrote became a powerful tool of state terror. Thousands were executed in the decades that followed, not just for violent crimes, but for opposing the government. The choice of method was deliberate. To be shot by a firing squad could be seen as a soldier's death, a death with some honor. But to be executed by the garrote was to die the death of a common criminal, a mark of ultimate disgrace. It was the regime's way of delegitimizing its opponents, branding them as felons instead of political adversaries. Before executions were moved behind prison walls in the late 19th century, a sentence of death by garrote was a public performance of state power. Crowds would gather in town squares to watch the grim ritual, a form of macabre entertainment and a stark warning. The event was steeped in ceremony. The condemned would be led to the platform, often dressed in a simple tunic and accompanied by priests. In a deeply Catholic country like Spain, the moments before death were profoundly religious. The prisoner would be offered confession and last rites, a final chance at spiritual salvation. A crucifix would be held before their eyes as the executioner made his final preparations. This fusion of religious ritual and state violence created a bizarre spectacle, presenting the execution not as mere killing, but as a righteous act sanctioned by both God and the state. The executioner himself was a figure of both fear and fascination. His skill, or lack thereof, was a subject of morbid discussion. An efficient executioner might earn a grudging respect, while a clumsy one could turn the event into a prolonged horror show. The quiet, almost anticlimactic nature of the garrote's operation stood in stark contrast to the drama of the gallows. There was no trapdoor, no dramatic drop. There was only the silent turn of a screw and the subtle, horrifying convulsions of a body as life was slowly squeezed out. The executions of Salvador Puig Antich and another man, a German drifter whose real name was Georg Michael Welzel, but was known as Heinz Chase, on the same day in March 1974, would be the last time the garrote was ever used. The death of Puig Antich, in particular, sent shockwaves across Spain and Europe. At a time when most of Western Europe had moved away from capital punishment, Spain's continued use of such a seemingly medieval device was seen as a barbaric symbol of Franco's dying regime. Massive protests erupted, and international condemnation rained down on the government. The end came swiftly after that. Francisco Franco died in November 1975, paving the way for Spain's transition to democracy. One of the new government's first major reforms was to address capital punishment. In 1978, the new Spanish Constitution abolished the death penalty for all peacetime offenses, and the garrote was officially retired. The death penalty was fully abolished for all offenses, including wartime, in 1995. For decades, Salvador Puig Antich's family fought to clear his name, arguing his military trial was a sham. Finally, after 50 years, their struggle saw a major breakthrough. In October 2024, the Spanish government presented the family with a declaration of recognition and reparation, acknowledging Salvador as a victim of the Franco regime. This was followed by a formal resolution in early 2025, that declared his trial illegal and illegitimate, and his sentence null. The history of the Garrote is a chilling look at state-sanctioned cruelty, and it's just one of many such stories from our past. If you find these hidden histories as fascinating as we do, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into the shadows of history. Today, the chairs and collars that once ended, lives now sit silently in museums, somber relics of a darker time. They're a stark, physical reminder of an era when the state could not only take a life but could choose to do so in the most agonizing way imaginable. The story of the Spanish Garrote is more than just the history of a machine. It's a terrifying reminder of how thin the line between justice and vengeance can be, and how easily instruments of law can become instruments of terror. What was once defended as an efficient method of execution is now seen universally as a symbol of institutional brutality. Confronting this history is uncomfortable, but it's necessary. It reminds us of the profound responsibility that comes with power and serves as a permanent warning against the cold, calculated cruelty that humans are capable of.